Okay, I am going to shut up and turn it over to John, who will tell us about traveling Alaska by rail.
Phones.
Thank you, Karen.
Is this good? That phones.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Henry.
In the back?
Remember that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure these
okay,
are
thank you. Just a preliminary, these trips that we've taken, like a lot of experiences you all had, this has been some time ago. So I'm talking about an experience that we had in 2008. Things have changed considerably, not only in Alaska, but everywhere. So there will be updates. Again, most of these trips that we've taken, with the exception of Greece and Portugal, have been domestic. Many places that you all have already visited. So I really look forward to your adding to the presentation once we complete it. So that's it. Just to update, as you may recall, Joann and I, from 1992 to 2008, I worked as a travel counselor for AAA Washington. And Joann and I took a number of trips, Elderhostel, or Road Scholar as it's called now, along with a few extra days, to explore areas on our own. This was done to share the experience with AAA employees. The idea was to review tourist attractions along with accommodations and eateries. Only a few of the latter are included here. So here is Discovering Alaska by Rail. Now, I've always been told that the best way to see Alaska is from the water. However, not being cruisers, and with a desire to see the interior of Alaska, we chose an Elderhostel trip entitled Discover Alaska by Rail. The 11-day program began in Fairbanks and ended in Seward, with several side trips, lectures, and excursions. So here's the railroad generally from Fairbanks to Seward. Not a long trip, but certainly a beautiful one. What do parents never tell their children in Alaska? Be home by dark. The Fairbanks Visitor Bureau has a program where you can, let's see, oh, I'm going too far ahead. After arriving a couple days prior, we stayed at the Townhouse Garden Bed and Breakfast a few blocks from downtown. It was a great location. After getting started, we chose the historic Pump House Restaurant and Saloon overlooking the Chena River for dinner. The reindeer steak was interesting, but the crab cakes disappointing. However, the history of this National Historic Monument gives us a fascinating picture of the gold rush activities. The Fairbanks Visitors Bureau has a program where you can meet with a personal greeter. Our greeting took place in Pioneer Park, a 44-acre facility filled with Alaska's history. It includes the former Alaska Land, a small village of shops and museums housed in log cabins, moved from downtown Fairbanks after the horrible flood in 1967. Here we met with Faye Schaus, a 27-year resident of Fairbanks. She was very helpful in answering our questions and sharing her life experience here. So at 9:30, with no sign of dusk, we left Pioneer Park and attempted to get some sleep in our B&B. Our plan in Fairbanks was to motor to those sites not included in the Elderhostel program, and we duplicated only 2. Our first trek was to North Pole. Oops, one thing you will never see on the 4th of July, fireworks. Remember, because it's light all the time, okay. Anyway, we went to the North Pole, just a few minutes away. I'm not sure what I expected, but the Santa Claus house, where Christmas is a year-round, was huge, with every Christmas doodad one can imagine, including a whole wall plastered with letters to Santa. From there, we headed to the Chena Hot Springs Resort, about an hour from Fairbanks. Now the Chena, we expected hot springs and some accommodations. However, we were surprised that this is also a major scientific study site. The geothermal power serves the entire complex, including a large indoor Aurora Ice Museum. That's what you can see in the picture there. Scientists come from around the world to study the site and learn how geothermal power works. They're even exploring ways to convert the power for hydrogen fuel vehicles. On the way back to Fairbanks, we spotted our first moose quietly chewing in the willow branches along the side of the road. We also stopped at a historical site honoring Felix Pedro, a very patient prospector born Felix Pedroni, and the first to find gold in the Fairbanks area. Pedro and E.T. Barnett, whose vessel loaded with goods to establish a trading post on the Tahana River, went aground at the present Fairbanks site. And they're credited with founding the city. Our next stop was it's not there. Let's see. There we visited the Georgetown Botanical Garden. This is part of the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, a nationally recognized botanical garden and a member of the National Network of Educational and Research Institutions dedicated to plant culture and conservation. Considering the discontinuous permafrost and short growing season, this experiment site shows how selected sites in Alaska's interior can produce amazing plants and vegetables. Cabbage growing in Alaska compares to growing some of the biggest pumpkin in the lower 48. Some cabbages can grow to 60 pounds. The 4 seasons in Alaska: almost winter, winter, still winter, and not winter. But that's changing. Let's see here. We breakfasted at the town site, and at the start of our Elderhostel program, we charged the large animal research station. By 1930, the muskox population in Alaska was almost extinct. In April 1980, 16 muskoxen captured on the Nunivak Island were taken to the station after a 1-year quarantine. Now there are almost 450 at this location, and more at a facility near Palmer, Alaska. Thousands of visitors get a chance to see these each year. These incredibly compact animals make the sound of thunder as they butt heads during the rutting season. I had a video of that, but it somehow didn't get included. If you can imagine, the head of these things is just compacted with horn material. And these guys butt their heads, and even at a distance of 100 yards, we could hear a clap of thunder. That was amazing. If you have a chance to go online and search muskox rutting, you'll see that. They butt heads during the rutting season or work to establish territory. Caribou are also kept here, and now we know that caribou are wild and native to Alaska, while their domestic siblings, reindeer, were imported from Siberia. While this facility was included in our Elderhostel program, we were fortunate to have a tour with only one other couple. University of Alaska at Fairbanks students conduct the tours. Many adventurous single men find their way to Alaska, so they say to women, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. Our room for the next, and meals for the next 2 nights were at the Wickersham dorm on the University of Fairbanks campus. Meals from the cafeteria were just fine, but sleeping with no darkening shades and jackhammers working until 10 p.m., this is Alaska in the summer, was an experience. With the expense of Alaska, dorm life is a good way for Elderhostel programs to keep their costs down. Our room was 2 cots, and it connected to another room with 2 cots for another couple. In the middle was the bathroom. And that was a kind of a rustic facility. We had some other nice ones, however. After Fairbanks, after breakfast, we had a presentation about the literature of Alaska with authors such as John Muir, Jack London, and Robert Service wrote from the perspective of outsiders, looking in and really perpetuated the myths and stereotypes of white men in the Alaska frontier. It wasn't until the 1970s and 80s that books on Alaska, women, and native cultures began to appear. This was an interesting perspective on the history of Alaska. Then we, 41 Elderhostelers, boarded our bus for our first field trip to the Large Animal Research Station, and I showed you that earlier. That afternoon, we boarded the Riverboat Discovery. This is a 3.5-hour Chena River trip on a paddle wheeler with about 500 passengers. I was initially suspect as it was very much like Disneyland, very scripted. A float plane landed and took off beside the boat. A 4-time Iditarod winner, Susan Butcher, spoke to us from the riverbank and showed off her digs, and we visited the Chena Indian Village, a recreated Athabascan Indian Culture Center. Here, young native staffers impressed us with stories about and descriptions of their culture as it originally existed in Alaska. Despite my reservations, it gave a good overall orientation to Alaska interior, the boat ride, and the weather was beautiful. That evening we returned to Pioneer Park to partake in the nightly salmon bake, a 25-year-old tourist attraction tradition in Fairbanks. This morning we were treated to a Life in Fairbanks presentation by folks living in Fairbanks, which included a number of interesting facts and historical data. We also learned that during a devastating flood in 1967, many residents took refuge on the UAF campus as it sits high above the city. This morning we were treated to a life, Following that, we visited the Museum of the North. Quite a building. An incredibly imposing structure on the campus. The museum's research collections, 1.4 million artifacts and specimens, represent millions of years of biological diversity and thousands of years of cultural traditions in the North. The collections are organized into 10 disciplines: archaeology, birds, documentary film, earth sciences, ethnology, history, fine arts, etc. Insects, mammals, and plants, and serve as a valuable resource for research on climate change, genetics, contaminants, and other issues facing Alaska and the circumpolar North. The museum is also the premier repository for artifacts and specimens collected on public lands in Alaska and a leader in northern natural and cultural history research. After lunch, we boarded our bus for a visit to the home of Mary Shields, the first woman to finish the Iditarod. Her dog kennel and beautiful log home are situated a few miles outside of Fairbanks. She shared experiences of her early days in Alaska and how she still enjoys hooking up her team for a run in the winter months. This was a very nice personal visit and not one that usually accompanies a tour in Alaska. After dinner, we traveled again, this time to the Alaska Oil Pipeline Viewing Station, just north of Fairbanks. We learned how the amazing construction of the pipeline allows it to shift and slide along its supports to survive earthquakes and the discontinuous permafrost. The ratio of oil to water is increasing as supplies diminish. At the time, Alaska was considering controversial natural gas pipeline to serve the area as well. Eskimo is from the French and means eaters of raw meat. Native Eskimos, the Inupiaq, Yupik, and Aleut, are three of the native cultures primarily located along the west coast of Alaska. The Athabascan and Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian, thank you, Indians occupied the interior and southeast areas of Alaska. We were up early this morning to catch the Alaska Railroad departure to Denali. I'm sorry I didn't have the little 2-minute video of the Alaska Railroad, but go online and look at it. I can only give you some idea of the beauty and topography of this area as we went by rail. The 3.5-hour trip gave us a real appreciation for the tundra and better understanding of permafrost. Small, spindly spruce trees, which are hundreds of years old, grow to limited height as their roots spread horizontally, as they cannot penetrate the permafrost. In Denali, we were met by staff from the Denali Education Center, which would be our home for the next 2 days. The permafrost, I'm wondering now if it's dissipating somewhat, if those spruce trees are getting taller. This center was founded in 1989 in order to develop and implement research, education, and communication programs that benefit the Denali Park bioregion and the state of Alaska and the planet. Hosting Elderhostel programs is a major component of the center. Its belief is that the wilderness provides an educational opportunity to teach and to share values common to all of us. After settling into our cabin, we spent the afternoon getting oriented, learning how to act when you see a bear or moose, and choosing activities for the next few days. That evening, Nan Eagleson, a biologist and Alaska devotee, fascinated us with her stories of the subarctic and its characteristics. I found it interesting that as one travels north in Alaska, you see the same land characteristics as when traveling to higher elevations in the lower 48. If New York had the same population density as Manhattan, there'd be 14 people on Manhattan Island. After breakfast, at our usual 6:45 hour, we boarded a bus for our day in Denali National Park. Unfortunately, because of the weather, I was convinced that the highest mountain peak in North America was a myth. For the rest of the trip, any views of Mount McKinley, now Denali, if you accept the native definition for the high one, or the great one, we were obscured by clouds. The bus ride is the only road through the park from the Wilderness Access Station was wonderful and very instructive. Of the many bus tour guides, ours had 27 years of experience in National Park. Most of it was here. Denali Park should not be visited primarily for its wildlife, although there's plenty. Its unspoiled natural beauty that is fanatically protected from human intrusion is an example of what national parks are supposed to be. While we were treated to a close-up view of a grizzly sleeping about 50 yards from the road, the caribou and Dall sheep we encountered were little brown or white specks in the distance. We saw plenty of snowshoe hares, a few eagles, and 2 ptarmigans, but no moose, wolves, or lynx. The ptarmigan, state bird of Alaska, changes colors from brown to white as it adapts to the seasons. We lunched at the Ellison Visitor Center, hoping for a glimpse of the great one, but to no avail. A classic view of Mount McKinley can be seen from Wonder Lake, another 20 miles from here. Those of us from Washington may well be scenery snobs. I couldn't but help compare Denali Park with our Cascades and Olympic Mountains and think, this ain't so great. Now, if I was ever from Kansas, it might be different. However, 6 million acres, the park itself is larger than the state of Massachusetts. It's truly a natural state. Now, if the weather had been clearer, that evening we heard from Tara Boyd, a staff member photographer who shared his beautiful photography and stories while locating in Alaska from Arkansas. It takes a special breed of person to choose Alaska as year-round residence. Of course, with today's conveniences, cell phones, snowmobiles, etc., not as hard as it was for the early settlers, but one must have a serious yen for the outdoors and a fierce independent streak to stay here. From a bumper sticker in Alaska, all who wander are not lost. Our choices that afternoon were a small plane flight over Denali, a hike in the park, or river rafting. Joann took the hike while I chose the third option. Now, the Denali Education Center sits on the banks of the Nicon River, which flows north on the east side of the park. The first half of the trip was a float, while the second part was an over-class 3 rapids. For this, my first experience, I actually expected more treacherous rapids. However, I think the rafters are protective of old folks and purposely sought out a few more exciting spots on the river for occasional thrill. But with the sun finally shining This was a wonderful way to enjoy the beauty of Denali, if not the peak itself. Our evening presentation was on the predators and prey of Alaska. This was my only disappointing experience. Perhaps of the darkened room with a slideshow after dinner, but we had heard much of this information before. The largest number of tourists each year are from Germany for hunting and Japan for the aurora borealis. That may be different now, but that was the case. Today we began to appreciate the real drama of Alaska landscape while riding the train from Denali to Anchorage. It was a rainy day, but a few craggy peaks began to show their stuff along the way. We arrived with steady rain in Anchorage and bused to the Ramada Inn for the night. After stays in the UAF dorm and Denali Center cabins, one appreciates Elderhostel's attempts to keep prices down when the rack rate at this place listed $300 per night, and that was in 2008. Private bathrooms are nice. That evening we met with a young friend who's a project engineer for the Alaska Railroad. It was interesting to see how a 30-something person, one with a good steady job, lives in Alaska these days. He, like other people, animals, and plants, works like crazy during the summer months to prepare for the long winter. This visit spurred us to recommend the inclusion of a presentation on the Alaska Railroad for this program. Its development and operation is a wonderful story in itself. The word igloo simply means house or abode, not a rounded ice block structure. We began the day at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, a renowned cultural center and museum in Alaska. It's an exciting place where all people can come to expand their understanding of Alaska's first people. Here they share the rich heritage of Alaska's native cultural groups, drawing upon the life ways of long ago, the wisdom of their elders, and traditions that endure. The Cultural Center and Museum is located in northeast Anchorage, designed to enhance self-esteem among Native people and encourage cross-cultural exchanges among all people. The indoor-outdoor facility presents music and dance, exhibits, and examples of housing and artifacts. The young people of Native descent who led us on a tour of the traditional village sites impressed us. That afternoon, we visited the Anchorage Museum, the largest museum in Alaska. The Anchorage Museum is a community-based institution with exhibits and programs on the art, history, and cultures of Alaska. Over 20 exhibitions are presented each year to more than 200,000 visitors. The museum also presents a full calendar of public programs and art classes. A docent gave us a very thorough tour of the facility. While it was very interesting and extensive, much of the information had already been presented to us in previous visits. Across the street from the Anchorage Museum, we visited a small Russian Orthodox museum. The museum features artifacts dating from the 18th century Russian America, now Alaska, until the present day. Among the objects on display are recently restored processional banners, possibly dating to 1794, rare icons believed to have been painted in the Sitka School of Iconography, 19th century, personal objects of St. Innocent, Veniaminov, a kayak frame used by missionaries traveling along the Nukshagat River, and beaded priest vestments designed and sewn by the Tlingit artist Emma Marks. As the first foreign settlers in Alaska, Russian pioneers plundered the area in search of fur from many animals. At the same time, they brought the Orthodox faith that many natives accepted and practice to this day. Remember, Alaska was purchased from Russia and not obtained from the native inhabitants. All life, humans, animals, and plants, are incredibly productive in the short summer months to prepare for the harsh winters in Alaska. This was our earliest morning as we boarded our bus for the train ride to Seward at 5:45 a.m. Old folks don't usually get up that early. This is the most scenic part of the railroad trip as mountains begin to rise dramatically from riverbeds and ocean waterways. The weather improved significantly as we arrived in Seward for the last portion of our journey. Our destination was the Alaska Sea Life Center. The Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Settlement Fund provided a significant portion of the money to help build this $56 million facility. Other funding was provided through grants, revenue bonds, and corporate and private donations. The City of Seward donated a 7-acre waterfront site. The center opened in May of 1998 and is dedicated to understanding and maintaining of the integrity of the marine ecosystem of Alaska. Its threefold mission is rescue, research, and education. Center-based research project helps scientists discover reasons for declining marine animal populations and environmental changes. The center also provides care for sick and injured marine animals, yielding important information about wildlife populations, and offers programs and presentations to design and expand public knowledge of Alaska's marine ecosystems. We were taken on a behind-the-scenes tour and given time to explore the facility on our own for the afternoon. Not yet done for the day, we met our bus for the 1-hour drive to Moose Pass, population 200. This is the site of the Trail Lake Lodge, our base for the next 3 days. Nestled in a beautiful mountain panorama just off of Highway 9 and located on the shores of the scenic Trail Lake in the Chugach National Forest, the lodge is centrally located for enjoyment of the Kenai Peninsula's many activities. We're fortunate to have a single room in the lodge and spend much of our time in a rustic pavilion overlooking the lake for meals and class sessions. That evening, Ranger Dan of the U.S. Park Service entertained us with a comparison of the various types of glaciers: Tidal, Piedmont, Cirque, etc. It was preparation for our coming activities. This was a long day. We boarded our trusty Trail Lake bus for a return to Seward and 2 morning classes at the Sea Life Center. Along the way, Chris Cassidy, our tour leader throughout the trip, fascinated us with facts about the marine ecology of the area. Our morning was spent in 2 classes, one about the crustaceans, squid and the like, including the chance to dissect one, and the other about salmon. Both presentations were thorough and very informative. Luckily, there are no tests in Elderhostel programs. After lunch, we headed toward Exit Glacier, one of the many emanating from the Harding ice field above Seward on the Kenai Peninsula. We were met by our friend Ranger Dan and began a 2.5-mile hike to the side of the glacier. Signs along the trail indicate the location of the glacier at the year indicated by the sign. His interpretive talks along the way provided information about how plants and wildlife survive in this environment. Any doubt about global warming is quickly shed as one travels this path. Our hike took us within about 20 feet of the side of the glacier. One truly feels the power of nature at this location. Back at Trail Lodge, we heard from a local resident about her early life in Kodiak with no electricity. The comparison of her first days in Alaska and present lifestyle was interesting. Saving the best for the last, we took a Kenai Fjords National Park cruise today, our only cruise in Alaska. Whatever we may have missed on a cruise ship was compensated by this cruise. The small vessel left Resurrection Bay, traveled into the Gulf of Alaska, and into the Holgate arm of Ayalik Bay to the base of the Holgate Glacier. This is another glacier extending from the Hardy ice field. We were fortunate to experience the carving as huge chunks of ice separated and fell into the water. The sound was amazing and surpassed only by the oohs and ahs of the passengers on the boat. During the cruise, we also saw a number of stellar sea lions basking on the rocks, several humpback whales, and innumerable flocks of gulls, murres, cormorants, and puffins flocking and diving to catch fish. The most exciting experience was racing with doll porpoises as they swam, leaped, and dove around the front of the boat at 15 knots. And the weather finally gave us views we had hoped for and seen in many promotional materials. That evening, we spent time reviewing the entire Elderhostel experience. What surprised us is things we learned in images which we will remember. With all the travel and side trips, it's hard to pick out one or two things. I wish we had sessions like this every evening. After our final breakfast, we boarded a motor coach from Moose Pass, a 2-hour drive back to Anchorage. We elected to stay overnight at the historic Anchorage Hotel. I'll tell you a little bit about this place. We liked to travel when we went to places to stay in the old hotels, the Brownstone in Denver, the Peabody in Memphis, and a lot of these old downtown hotels that are so classic you just have to visit them. Situated in the heart of downtown Anchorage, hotels on the National Register of Historic Places and the only historic hotel among Anchorage lodging properties. Anchorage was in its infancy when the original hotel structure located on the corner of 3rd and E Street was built. By 1936, the city of Anchorage was growing so rapidly that the Anchorage Hotel needed to expand. Our current building, the Anchorage Hotel Annex, was built across the alleyway on 3rd Avenue, and a sky bridge was connecting the two buildings. In the 1964 earthquake, half of the structure was damaged and razed. For many years, the Anchorage Hotel served as its primary meeting and gathering place. At one time, it was the only place in the city where you could enjoy a meal on fine china with linen and silver. Gee, that's just like University House. After a leisurely breakfast, with our rather pricey stay, we rolled our luggage to the nearby Central Bus Terminal and took a 50-cent senior ride to the airport. After, this, our 9th Elderhostel experience, we were exceptionally satisfied with the variety of topics, side trips, and activities. I no longer believe that Alaska is best seen from the water. Traveling by railroad from the interior to the Kenai fjords, with many stops in between, gave us the opportunity of seeing much more than we expected. Alaska's infinite variety of topography, its lifestyle, the wildlife, and incredible scenery will stay in our memories for a long, long time. Many first visitors to Alaska vow to return. I can't say that I will do so in the near future. For now, this trip really satisfied our curiosity about this amazing state for some time to come. That's all, folks. If we can hit those lights, we'll see if anybody wants to give some comments about their Alaska experiences.
We can't offer you, unless you want to walk up here to the front and use this microphone. Al?
I'll just holler.
Okay, you holler at us.
Well, I spent the summer of 1958
Get up closer to you.
at what's now Denali National Park.
That's as good as I can get, I think.
Okay, are people hearing me?
Yeah,
Sure.
You got a
Okay.
nice loud voice.
You can hear it.
Anyway, by sort of accident, I got a seasonal ranger position at what was then Mount McKinley. And best summer I ever spent.
Yeah.
Henry,
Yeah.
want
I
a
just wanna
microphone?
thank you. I don't need that. Thank you, John. I've been all over Alaska, Barrow, Nome, Anchorage, Fairbanks, out in the Aleutians, Kodiak, and so forth. But I haven't seen any of these places that you have just shown, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, we're, Nancy, my wife next to us, we've lived in Alaska until about 3 weeks ago for Joann. I'm just saying you did a great job. And for a 2-week trip, a beautiful summary of what is a great and interesting state, about which a lot more can be said in the years that I was there. Thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome. A word of advice, do you know how to put your browsers into private browsing mode? If you're going to Google muskox running, I think you should probably do that in private browsing mode, because you wouldn't want to be tracked on the internet, because who knows what other kinds of notifications you might end up getting.
Cal?
Yeah, I got reminded of all kinds of things. Among other things, I got to feed the sled dogs a couple times a week. And the railroad ran fairly close to park headquarters and where we were all living. And when the trains would beep, the dogs would all answer for about 5 minutes.
Hi, Courtney, welcome back.
Thank you. Charlie and I went with friends to Alaska, and I just want to brag about him because he went all the way to the top of the Chilkoot Pass. And I don't know how many of you know about the Chilkoot Pass, but it was used by the miners who had to haul huge amounts of luggage and supplies to last a year up to the top, and it's a real challenge. I never made it, but Charlie did sort of hand over hand on the boulders going up to the top. But he made it to the top of the Chilkoot Pass, which was no small feat.
Good for you, Charlie. Did you ever go to the Malamute Saloon? You went?
Could I just add that the word gold has not appeared in your presentation today, which, you know, I think many of us think of Alaska gold.
I thought he did mention gold. Fairbanks.
I have a report on my grandfather and his brother in Alaska around early 1900s. So they were up there searching for it, but I'm not sure what's happening with gold today up there. Do you know?
Yeah, there's several big, there's several large new mines, and several in prospect, some of which pose some significant environmental damage, particularly in getting ore from the mine site to where it's smelted.
There's a place between the airport and town in Nome where for a few, I don't know how many, I forgot, for a few bucks you can pan for gold a little bit. Of course, nobody gets any much.
Yeah, I had a little tiny souvenir gold nugget once upon a time. Somebody took a trip to Alaska and brought it back. Anything else? Okay, next week we will not have a program because that's an opera day. The next one after that is going to be Jerry Garvey. I don't know what Jerry's going to talk about, but I don't even need to ask because whatever it is, it's going to be really interesting.
Talking about AI.
About AI? Are you going to tell us about AI?
No, not this time.
Oh.
Okay.
This time I'm going to talk about the Euclid telescope.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people have come up and asked me, why don't we do a program about AI? And about all I can say is, oh, that's a good idea. Would you like to do it?
I'm going to give 5 lectures on AI.
Yes, right. Coming up.
Coming up, yeah.